Welcome to INAN's Advocate. INAN's Advocate is a platform for lawyers having less than 5 years of practice. Today we have with us Advocate Vaibhav Date. He is going to speak on the evolution of the Indian Constitution. So without wasting further time, I would request Advocate Vaibhav Date to commence with his lecture. Thank you.
First of all, I would like to thank INA's platform for giving me this opportunity. I'm very grateful for me to give this lecture. My subject is about evolution of Indian Constitution. If we try to trace the origin of the concept of Indian state, which as of exists today, we need to go back to 1858, which began the rule of Britishers in India. The journey from 1858 to 2024 is long drawn and needs to be revisited to protect our own constitution. The suppression of the 1857 mutiny was decisive factor for the British Kingdom to take over the control of the Indian government. The suppression led on the one hand to the end of the Mughal rule in India and on the other hand the rule of the East India Company, which was established with the conquest of Plassey in the year 1757. The company protested against the decision and held that she established a rule in India at a time when the crown was losing her significant colonial government in the United States. The administration to control Indian territory passed over to the crown on November 1st, 1858. John S. Mill, as we all know, even filed a petition against the decision but did not find any success. The Act of 1859, the Board of Control and the Court of Directors were abolished and their place was taken over by the Secretary for State of India. The Council of India was formed consistently of 7 members. The Indian administration was to be supervised by the Viceroy of the Crown. The Secretary of State and his position in the cabinet increased his authority over the finances and political activities of the Government of India. There are some significant laws. First is Government of India Act 1858, then Indian Council Act 1861, then Indian Council Act 1892, then comes the Parliament Reform 1909 by the pressure of Indian Congress the then, and then there is one 1930 Karachi Congress resolution that we will speak to later on. Government of India Act 1935, that we all know that our Indian constitution is largely has been taken from this act. And then we have the Indian Independence Act 1947. First, we will return to the Government of India Act 1858. The Government of India Act 1858 is an act of Parliament of the United Kingdom passed on August 2nd, 1858. Its provision called for the liquidation of the British East India Company and the transference of its function to the British Crown. The power went from the East India Company to the Crown. The Lord Palmerston, the then Prime Minister of United Kingdom, introduced a bill for the transfer of control of the Government of India from the East India Company to the Crown, referring to the grave defects in the existing system of the Government of India. The main provisions I shall read. The company's territories in India were to be vested in the Queen, British Queen, as we know. The company ceasing to exercise its power and control over these territories. India was now to be governed by the Queen's name. As we know, Her Majesty, it is was called as. The Queen's Principal Secretary of State received the powers and duties of the company's Court of Directors. First, it was a Court of Directors, and now it is a Queen's. And then, now it is Queen's Principal Secretary, Secretary of State. The Council of 15 members was appointed to assist the Secretary of State for India. The Council became an advisory body in India affairs. For all the communications between Britain and India, the Secretary of State became the real channel. Now the Secretary of State became the real power. The Secretary of State was empowered to send some secret dispatches to India directly without consulting the Council. This is very important. We will come back to this as it has a significance in the later on act. He was also authorized to constitute special committees of his council. The Crown was empowered to appoint a Governor General and the governors of the presidencies. There were presidencies, large number of presidencies. Provision for the creation of an Indian civil service under the control of Secretary of State. This is the Indian civil service as of now exists. Yeah, there are IAS, IPS, and all those services. The origin of this is come from this Act of 1858. All the property of the East India Company was transferred to the Crown. The Crown also assumed the responsibilities of the company as they related to treaties, contracts, and so forth. This act ushered in new period of Indian history, bringing about the end of company rule in India. The era of new British Raj would last until partition of India in August 1947, at which time all of the territory of the Raj was granted dominion status within the dominion of Pakistan and Union of India. We know all the partition and all these things. Now we come to the Indian Council Act 1861. This has been gradual development over the period of time. The Indian Council Act 1861 was an act of Parliament of the United Kingdom that transferred the Viceroy of India's Executive Council into a cabinet run on the portfolio system. This cabinet had 6 ordinary members who took charge of separate department in Kolkata's government. This was first the capital of India was Kolkata, and then later on it shifted to Delhi. I will come back to that. The military commander in chief sat in with council as an extraordinary member. The viceroy was allowed under the provisions of the act to overrule the council on affairs if he deemed it necessary, as was the case in 1879 during the tenure of Lord Lytton. The Secretary of State of India at the time the act was passed, Sir Charles Wood, believed that the act was of immense importance. The act is a great experiment. That everything is changed in India is obvious enough, and that the old autocratic government, which presidencies and all the kingdoms cannot stand unmodified, is undisputable. The Legislative Council at Kolkata was given extensive authority to pass laws for the British India as a whole, while the Legislative Councils of Bombay and Madras were given the power to make laws for the peace and good government of their respective presidencies. Now we will come to the first efforts by Indians in formulating Indian National Parliament. The Indian Association organized the first national conference in December 1883 at the Albert Hall. About 100 people attended the Congress, and the first meeting commenced within the recitation of national hymn. In his opening speech, Ananda Mohan Bose declared that the conference was the first stage towards a national parliament. On December 1885, 72 social reformers, journalists, and lawyers congregated for the first session for Indian National Congress at Gokuldas Tejpal Sanskrit College, Bombay. The first significant success for Indian National Congress was the Indian Councils Act 1892. What was there in Indian Councils Act 1892? We will see. An Act of Parliament of the United Kingdom that authorized an increase in the size of the various legislative council in British India. The number of non-official members, this is very important, the non-official members, was increased both in central and provincial legislative council. The universities, district board, municipalities, zamindars, and chambers of commerce were empowered to recommend members to provincial council. Thus was introduced the principle of representation. It is also relaxed restriction imposed by the Indian Councils Act 1861, thus allowing the council to discuss each year's annual financial system. They could also put questions within certain limits to the government on the matter of public interest after giving 6 days notice. Foundation of modern democracy was laid down, as we can see. Now, the role of Congress comes to the play. Under popular pressure, the government amended the old provision and passed the new Indian Council Act of 1892, as we know. The act increased the number of non-official members, a few of whom were to be indirectly elected. Members were also given right to speak on the budget, but not the right to vote on it. Indians were disappointed by this act. They felt it is a mockery of their demands. They made a demand for non-official elected majority in the council, and most of all, for non-official Indian control over the public purse. They raised the slogan, which is very important and which has been widely discussed, which is no taxation without representation. In American scenario, it is very important. Now comes the Morlemento 1909, as I discussed earlier. The strength of imperial and provincial legislative council was less, but the character remained unchanged. An official majority was retained at the center, where only 27 members out of maximum 60 were to be elected through a very narrow electorate. Though non-officials were in a majority in the provincial legislature, the nominator members usually voted with the officials against the elected. There were 3 main types of electorate for the central legislation. First, general. Second, class such as Muslim and landholders. 3, special like the universities and chambers of commerce. The greater part of the non-official members in the provincial councils were to be elected by groups of local bodies, landholders, traders, and universities. The power of legislature were limited. Only the number who had asked a question could ask a supplementary. Important areas of public interest, such as the army and the native states, were excluded from debate and resolution. Discussion and voting on separate heads of the budget were allowed, but no resolution, I repeat, no resolution or voting was permitted to the whole budget. Now comes after stage after Morle Now Lord Hardinge succeeded the the then in a secret dispatch, as I discussed earlier, the secret dispatch thing. In a secret dispatch, the government of India recommended certain changes in the administration of India. According to the suggestion of the Governor General Council, King George V, at his coronation darbar in Delhi in December 1911, announced the revocation of the partition of Bengal and of certain changes in the administration of India. Firstly, now this is very significant thing. Now the capital of India is Delhi, as we know, but this is the first time that firstly the government of India should have its seats at Delhi instead of Calcutta. By shifting the capital to the site of past Muslim glory, the British hoped to placate the Bengal's Muslim community now agreed at the loss of provincial power and privilege in eastern Bengal. Secondly, the five Bengali-speaking divisions, Presidency, Burdawan, Dhaka, Rajashahi, and Chittagaon, were to be united and form into a presidency. Now they will come together as a presidency to be administered by governor in council. The area of this province would be approximately 70,000 square miles with a population of 42 million. This is very important because now, as of India now exists today, this is we know there are Jammu Kashmir, Kerala, and states, but this is the first significant step towards the unity of India. Thirdly, a lieutenant governor in council with legislative council was to govern the province comprising of Bihar, Chota Nagpur, and Orissa. There are Sipi and Berar, and there are a lot of presidencies were there, but these were united and geographically united for the first time. Fourthly, Assam was to revert back to the role of chief commissioner. The date chosen for the formal ending of partition and reunification of Bengal was 1st April 1912, and this was the first partition. Now, and another we know as 1947. Now, the role of Congress comes to the play. Congress has made a significant development, and now the Secretary of State India, Lord Buchanan, challenged the Swarajist Party to produce a constitution which carried behind it a fair measure of general agreement among the great peoples of India. We know there is diverse. India is a diverse country, and there are a lot of communities, Punjabis, Gujaratis. So it is very important that there must be a one constitution. So the Congress Working Committee, the All India Liberal Federation, the Muslim League, and the other organizations met at Lucknow in August 1928, when in the form of an all-parties conference. This was the first all-party conference which played a significant role. It accepted a draft constitution drawn up by a committee under the chairmanship of Motilal Nehru. It provided for bicameral sovereign parliament with the same autonomous power as enjoyed by the dominant parliaments within the British Empire, such as Canada and Australia. We know that Canada and Australia and many of many of these areas were the colonies of the then British Empire. In 1913, the Karachi Congress session is also significant as far as the fundamental rights are concerned. We know the fundamental rights, the preamble and directive principles makes the our constitution very important and very significant. A resolution was adopted on fundamental rights and economic policy. This is very important, and I shall read the main points were assurance of popular fundamental rights. Second, removal of caste and religious disabilities of all sections of the people. Third, development of regional national language and establishment of Indian provinces on a linguistic basis. Fourth, reduction of taxes. Five, prohibition of beggar or forced labor in a vogue and backward regions and many of native states. Six, abolition of salt duty. You know, the salt march. Seventh, protection of the special rights for workmen, such as healthy working conditions, minimum living wage, unemployment insurance, and 8 hour a day and a paid holidays. You know, the fundamental rights as of now exist, but this is the base of these fundamental rights which are enshrined in the Indian Constitution right now. Now comes the Government of India Act 1935. The Government of India Act 1935. This is the very base of the Indian Constitution has been attracted many of these provisions from this act. what was there in Government of India 1935, we shall see. The Government of India Act 1935 was originally passed in August 1935 and is said to have been longest act of parliament ever enacted by that time. We know that the Indian constitution is the largest, and it is called as elephantine constitution. We will come to it. Because of its length, the act was retroactively split by the Government of India Reprinting Act 1935 into two separate acts. The Government of India Act 1935 and the Government of Burma Act. References in literature on Indian political and constitutional history are usually to the shortened Government of India Act 1935. So, what are the basic features of Government of India Act 1935? The grant of large measure of autonomy to the provinces of British India, ending the system of diarchy introduced by the Government of India in 1999. This diarchy was very much vehemently opposed by the Indian National Congress. Provision for the establishment of Federation of India to be made up of both British India and some or all other princely states. This is now of 1935. The introduction of direct election, thus increasing the franchise from 7 million to 35 million people. A partial recognition of the provinces. Sindh was separated from Bombay. Bihar and Orissa was split into the separate provinces of Bihar and Orissa. Burma was completely separated from India. Aden was also detached from India and established as a separate colony. Now the geographical boundaries have been largely, we can say that they are being drawn. Membership of the provincial assemblies was altered so as to include more elected Indian representatives who are now able to form majorities and to be appointed to form governments. The establishment of federal government. However, this was also opposed by the then independent freedom fighters. However, the degree of autonomy introduced at the provincial level was subject to important limitations. This was the reason the Congress had opposed this. The provincial governors retained important reserve powers, and the British authorities also retained a right to suspend responsible government. The parts of the act intended to establish the Federation of India never came into operation due to opposition from rulers of the princely states. The remaining parts of the act come into force in 1937 when the first elections under the act were also held. Now come the Cripps Commission, as we know. The right of people to determine the form of government under which they would live and to frame their own constitution was finally considered in March 1942 when Sir Stanford Cripps brought to India a reform proposal of War Cabinet. The Cripps proposal were rejected. However, the Cripps proposal was rejected, but the right of Indians to frame their own constitution through a constituent assembly was established. The election to Constituent Assembly was held in July 1946. The Constituent Assembly met as scheduled on December 9, 1946. Jawaharlal Nehru moved objective resolution on December 13, 1946 and described it as a solemn pledge to people which they would redeem in the constitution that they would frame. This solemn pledge to people and this objective resolution is very important as it is the base of our preamble of constitution. The basic aims and objectives of the new state of India find their expression in the objective resolution approved by the Constituent Assembly on January 2nd, 1947, and the most significant statement of such aims and objectives is found in the preamble to the Constitution of 1950. Now we come to the independence. The Indian Independence Act 1947. On July 2, 1947, the draft of Independence Bill implementing the political settlement in accordance with and in conformity to the announcement of June 3, 1947 was circulated to the leaders of the Congress and the Muslim League for their consideration. The bill was introduced in Parliament on July 5th, and after having passed through both the houses, it received the royal assent on July 18 to become operative on August 15, 1947. August 15, 1947 is our Independence Day. The drafting committee headed by Dr. Ambedkar, which was appointed by the resolution of the Constituent Assembly, we have talked about the Constituent Assembly, on August 29, 1947, submitted its report on February 21st, 1948. The draft constitution was presented to the Constituent Assembly on November 4th, 1948 for the consideration. Now we know that there are three procedures: first reading and second reading, and there are when first reading we will get to know. Its first reading comprised general discussion which commenced on November 4th and continued till November 9. Then began the second reading, and it continued from November 15, 1948 to October 17, 1949. And now, how many amendments? 7,635 amendments were tabled, out of which 2,473 were actually moved and discussed. The assembly again sat on November 14, 1949 for the third reading of the draft, and it's concluded on November 26. On this, the Constituent Assembly received the signatures of the President of the Constituent Assembly and it was declared passed. The final session of the Constituent Assembly was held on January 24th, 1950. It unanimously elected Rajendra Prasad, the first President of Republic of India, under the new Constitution, which came into force on January 26, 1950. Now, January 26 is why it is important date. We know it is a Republic date, but the history we do not know. I will tell you. This date was especially chosen for the inauguration of the Indian Republic, as a pledge was drawn up and adopted, and it was decided that the people of India should take this pledge, which I discussed earlier, at public meetings on 26 January 1930 to proclaim their fight for independence in the Lahore session of the Congress. On 31st December 1929, Nehru, as a president of Indian National Congress, unfurled the tricolour on the bank of Ravi in Lahore and announced the goal of Purna Swaraj. So, the basic of January 26, 1950 is from the Lahore and the Karachi Convention of the Congress. The constitution which finally emerged of the Constituent Assembly consisted of 395 articles and 8 schedules. M.V. Kamath humorously remarked in the Constituent Assembly that the emblem and the crest that we have selected for assembly is an elephant. It is perhaps in the consonance with that our constitution is the bulkiest that the world has ever produced. Now my references are Freedom Struggle by Bipin Chandra, History of National Movement and Constitutional Development in India by Mahendra Kumar Talware, and Select Constitution, which is a voluminous book which compares many of the constitution by S. Chan. Thank you very much for my.
Vaibhav, thank you very much. It was nice to hear the entire evolution starting from 1858 because this is a great history which everybody should know about it. And it was a very analytical thing which you had presented today. So the whole process in which you have explained the evolution of constitution was really nice. Thank you for that.
I'm grateful.
And a small token from Hammurabi to you.
Thank you very much.